Hey, welcome back everyone. So in this video, I want to show you how to draw facial features on planes. So I think this is a excellent exercise if you're struggling to get areas of the face that sort of fit a dimension or a direction and dimension. So this is something that I should probably practice more often, but what we do is we just establish a basic plane. So a flat plane is just as it sounds, just a single flat sort of like sheet of paper or something like that, but in an angle or an orientation that allows us to perceive perspective. So if you were to look at this, this would be the perceived perspective, something like this, right? So with that aside, we'll just start with this and a center line both vertically and horizontally, but again in that perceived perspective. And then the goal here is to draw a facial feature, or it doesn't have to be that, but we're going to use facial features today because I think it's one of the more difficult things to sort of do when you turn the head and tilt the head and things like that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to place a nose, and to do that, we're going to just start with another plane of the nose, which would be like the bridge of the nose coming out. We'll have it match that center line right there. So I'm just relating that to that, if you can't tell. And then bring that back. I'm going to bring it down at an angle. Now, if I was really trying to stay with this perspective, then I would essentially bring it back more like this. It's probably hard to visualize, maybe even back to about here because of the angle, but I'm really not trying to do that. I'm actually trying to establish a little bit of a drop down to this bottom plane change of the nose. And this is where just lots of practice is going to come in because this is subjective, I think. Like it's not a right or wrong scenario here. And then we're going to get this little wedge-like shape that you see that goes up to the brow and just something like this. So now we have a pretty, what I would call a pretty distinct idea of perspective of the nose now. And then we can do things like, drop an oval for the tip of the nose, figure out where the nostrils are going to be. So you get the part that drops down a little bit further here down the middle. Sorry, terminology is escaping me today, but we'll just go for basic terms. And some ovals for the nostrils, the flares or wings of the nostrils. And I've actually got a blog post where I label the terminology. I should remember it all considering I drew it and labeled it then, but I can't. I have to revisit it over and over again. But you can head over to my site and look at that blog post if you want to learn the terminology. But just like this, we have a bit of a nose. And so all I really did is a bit of rope drawing or, connecting the dots at that point, right? I'm just going around the shapes a little more organically. I'll zoom in a little bit more for you, even though I try to stay back as far as possible for as long as possible when doing this. It just seems to come out better when that happens. Something about zooming in sort of changes the way that we analyze, and we start to get a little too critical on the clarity of the line work versus maybe the shapes and forms that we need. But now, again, we can soften this up continually until it looks more and more natural, right? It's a bit too constructed and angular or blocky, things like that. So we just keep introducing organic versions of these lines and curves until we get what we want. We might put a slight little bump there, something like that. Sometimes on this side you'll see the bump or ridge to the bridge of the nose. Sometimes you'll see a little definition here. Just depends on the type of nose you're doing. So I won't get too far off into that. Lots of variations that we can create with noses. And then from this point, you can start to think a little bit more about other plane changes and things like that. And you can really, you can just really get in here, right? There's just so much when you start to get more and more realistic. I'm not going to go for a realistic nose. Typically, I'm doing things that are a little more cartoon-like, but I just want you to see that the same rules can apply. And then as you get up here, obviously you don't want these really dramatic angles, but you can start to think about the way the skin folds occur up here. Some people have a larger, what's that called? I think it's called the glabella right there, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But you know, there's a difference in definition or overall size relationship proportion to that area right there. Some people it's very small, some people it's very noticeably taller and wider, all that good stuff, right? Lots of variation in areas like this. But again, back to what the focus is really, is allowing you to create a sense of depth. Actually, I don't like the way that came out. That should be, the plane change here would probably be much lower. But allowing you to create a sense of depth with this. And then remember too, like I always say this one over and over, but it just really helps me a lot, so I always share it. Maybe you're a first-time viewer. Is that you can create all sorts of cross-contour lines and wrapping lines to figure out if these forms and volumes are, you know, adequate, if you like them. You know, so play around with those as well. All right, so let's try another one. Let's go ahead and change the plane change. So again, this is really where, to me, the power of this exercise starts to show within our work, is that when you're moving these things around, it's going to give you a very distinct way to practice these particular areas of the character in these different angles that you might not otherwise be doing. You know, you might be avoiding. And the reason why I say this, a lot of us will tend to draw things very forward-facing or to the side, right? Especially in the beginning. Well, this is going to clearly fight that urge for you. So, for instance, if I go to draw a mouth here, and I'll just do a closed mouth on this one, right? I might do something like this, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, that feels really flat. It feels very sort of wrong. You know, like why is it just so, you know, it's like I stuck a piece of paper to another piece of paper, right? It just has no depth to it. Well, there's things that we have to consider. One of which is that anything on this side of this hemisphere, I don't know what you call it, a hemisphere, it's not sphere, right? So this side of the quadrants, right? These two quadrants or whatever, would need to be more narrow. So I think I did that a little bit. I think that this side is more narrow than this side, and it would need to be. So that's the idea of not foreshortening, or forced perspective in general. So there's that. But the other part is that we're talking about something that in this area of the face would be spherical, or dimension, you know, it would have curvature to it, like this. Something like that anyways. So that needs to also be there. So let's go back and try this again and say, okay, if that was the case, then this would be a curve that went inward, something like this. This would actually curve out a little bit before it dipped back into that little pocket. And so the lip itself would have to curve and roll back in, right? So you'd get more of this kind of thing. You know, an S hook, I guess, small S hook. And you would repeat that, so you're going to continue to line up to that center line, but you have to get these curves, and they have to feel like they're wrapping around and pushing back into, you know, just think about when somebody smiles, they have these little puckers right there, right? I don't know if that's the technical term, puckers, but you know, they have the little dimples right there, and I don't mean the ones up here on the cheek, but just where the smile tucks back into the side folds of the skin. And so it needs to look like it goes back into those directions, right? So there's that. Again, we can use our wrapping lines to go down the center of the top lip like that. Same thing with the bottom lip. It's easy to want to say, well, there's the bottom lip, we're done. And I think that almost works, especially now because the top lip is doing some of the work of looking organic and having a bit of dimension and curvature to it. And keep playing around with that as we go. But we can also introduce that with the bottom lip by wrapping around like this, really pushing that curve into that area. I tend to notice, and maybe not always, but it seems like, and especially from a top-down view, the top lip is going to sort of overlap and be bigger, maybe not bigger, but it'll go over and in front of from this angle to the bottom lip. And then we'll get the curvature kind of going here for the bottom lip. And then you have this little pocket of skin that's in the Andrew Loomis book. It's a wedge-like shape that he uses, like that. We're not going to see that as well from this angle, but we still want to sort of get that in there. And then the fold starts to go like this. Depends on the person. Some people have a more noticeable sort of bit of I don't know if that's fat. I guess it would be fat, right? Skin, fat, right there. Sorry, I know you anatomy knowledgeable types are just getting so mad at me right now. Like, no, that's called the blah blah blah. Okay, so there we go. There's another one. So again, this is really just to hopefully get you out of the the bad habit of drawing things too awfully flat and lacking dimension. And to me, it's a really fun exercise. We'll go ahead and do one more with an eye. And let's see, we've got one that's going sort of up and away, one that's going down and away. Maybe more of an angle this way. Let's see if this would work. And you could really draw a bunch of these plane changes first and then just apply whatever you want to it. Again, it doesn't have to be an eye. What really made me think of this is I occasionally do like 3D sculpting, and there's an exercise where if you don't feel like taking a sphere and sculpting on it, because sometimes it can feel better to just work off a flat plane, you subdivide a flat plane and you do the same thing. So that's really where I got this from, and I think I've seen other videos throughout the years that have utilized it as well. But for me, that's what I relate it to. And as I always tell people, I actually love sculpting in 3D every now and then because it gives me a more dimensional set of ideas as I go to draw. So and I just enjoy it. It's sort of fun. So all right, we're going to place an eye in this one. And so for here, I'm just going to take, I'll start with a very flat on flat approach, even though I just said not to do that with the lips, but we're not going to end up there. We're just going to start there. So you get this very flat looking representation of an eye, which could be hexagonal. Is that right? I don't even know my shapes today. Is that a hexagon? Trapezoid. I think it's a trapezoid. Anyways, it's not a hexagon. Yikes. I know what a hexagon is, folks. It's one of these stop sign looking things, right? Is that a hexagon? Now you're going to think I don't know what a stop sign is. All these years, I haven't been using those things, whatever they are. Okay, so something like this, just a slanted sort of diamond-like shape. The main thing that I'm trying to get here is that generally with eyes, you'll see a wider sort of peak right about there. It'll curve down to the side. And then it'll be wider here. And you'll see right about there, it sort of tucks up and under that top eyelid. So not the greatest eye, but those are if you simplified this into a basic shape, it would be something like this, right? So that's really what I'm trying to relate to this dimensional version. It's flat, but in this perspective that I'm trying to envision. So I just want to give you some ideas. But it's something like this. Sometimes it helps me to draw things flat in a straight on perspective and then relate that to something more dimensional. So we'll get rid of some of this just so we can see what we're doing. And so now I want to add a little bit of curvature to this. Make it look and feel more organic. I want to also think about the eyeball behind it. Something like this. Because that generally will help me to add the right organic feeling and curvature to the eyelids. So let's try that. So again, looking at this one over here, going down to the tear duct, down to there. We know that there's a roundedness in the way that it interacts with that tear duct or whatever that little part is right there. And then as we get that curvature, it's got to curve down a bit as it meets the back of the eyelid, or the furthest point away from us. I like to put this little sample eyelash there. And then down, around. And as we get into here, if we study this part again, it rolls inward to this point, right, generally. And you know, again, it's really hard to explain this stuff because there's so much variation, right? You're probably looking at, well, that's not the way I would do an eye. Well, of course, we all have very different eyes, very different styles, lots of variation in humanity. So you just got to play around with these concepts. These are just things that I typically gravitate towards. So hopefully you get that it's just here to hopefully direct you a little bit, but not to give you any sort of confinement. You know, you just got to push past what I'm saying here and do your own thing. So something like this. Now, the only bad thing is it still looks very flat. In fact, I've somehow made it look like it's straight to our view versus this perspective. So I got to try to keep pushing that. So the other thing is this curvature, the spherical nature, would be a lot more rounded and away from us. So it's probably a lot of that forced perspective that I'm missing there, or how it would condense down as it got further away. So I'm going to keep nudging this around, try to figure that out. And maybe by adding the little bit of the eyelash, or top eyelid I should say, I can figure some of that out. I also tend to try to perceive how we would see more of the roundedness of the eye the further the head tilts away from us. So for instance, we might not even get this very corner at a perspective like this because it might get blocked by the side of the eye. So just picture like not being able to see the side of something because the spherical shape of something else starts to become more predominant. I don't know what to compare it to, but that's really what I'm thinking there. And then from this point, we start to add eyelashes, and these are nice because they help us direct the perspective as well. You know, it starts to become more apparent that we're looking at an eye from an angle because we can utilize things like the lower eyelid, the way it curves away and sometimes even gets hidden by the eye. And then again, the eyelashes can be very directional, right? They're pretty much like the same concept at this point as wrapping lines or cross contour lines. Same thing with the iris and the pupil. We can use this as a way to show where the eye is looking. Or obviously it shows where the eye is looking. I was thinking a way to show the dimension. Again, everything reinforcing the depth and dimension of this this idea. Same thing with the eyebrow. We can bring that up. Just going to scribble that in for now so I can get this figured out. Side of the eye there. And a lot of times from an angle like this, the nose will block the eye. So we want to get some of that in there if we're going to continue on with this face. But now we can start to get rid of some of these other construction lines and bring it all together. So let me go ahead and do that. All right, so as I refine this, hopefully you've enjoyed today's video. I would love to know what you think. And if you want to see particular content of any kind, make sure to comment below. I'll do my best to get that on the channel. And just remember that I have written tutorials, step-by-step instructions on my website, and I also have online courses teaching how to draw heads, anatomy, and figure drawing. And I also give real-time feedback on that, and then I also set up live streams for my students. So just all that, if you want to take your learning to the next level with online education, please consider my content, and the links are all in the description box below. So I thank you so much for tuning in and watching today. Good luck with your art, and bye for now.